I have asked a lot of people, look, if you put all your humbleness aside, don't you think that you're kind of special? I'm like, yeah, I kind of do. I'm like, yeah, so do I. It just takes us a little while, I think, to get underneath the imposed modesty that we think we're supposed to have, to dig to our own truth that we think we're pretty awesome. And I think we just need to step into that a little bit more.
Welcome to the follow-up question. I'm your host, Michael Ashford. Come with me on a journey as I explore what it means to find common ground at a time when it feels increasingly harder to do so, to listen more than we speak so that we can understand that our differences don't have to divide us. My aim with this show is to bring you perspectives and ways of looking at issues or topics that perhaps you haven't considered before, so that you can then take that new knowledge and apply it to your ability to empathize with the people around you. I'm a former journalist who believes everyone has a story to tell, and it's only when we ask questions and listen that we truly reveal what connects us as humans. Our dreams, our desires, our experiences, our ideas, and who we truly are. Call it placing a chip on your shoulder or making someone eat crow. We humans have an incredible ability to take words meant to harm or tear us down and use them as fuel for success. The playground comeback, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can never hurt me. Yeah, that usually isn't the case. Words are powerful. Words carry weight. Words most definitely can hurt. And words absolutely can spur action. And that action can lead us down some dark paths or to some sunny peaks. My guest this week is Jeffrey Shaw, author of a just-released book, The Self-Employed Life. Jeffrey has never had a traditional job. He's always worked for himself, starting as a kid when he'd sell eggs door to door. Entrepreneurs and the self-employed are masters at using the words of the doubting as gasoline on the embers of the idea that drives them. And Jeffrey is no different. But imagine how hard it might be if those words meant to belittle and discourage came from your own father. For Jeffrey, that's how it happened to play out. And now he's written a book guiding others on the ways to make the same break on their own self-employed dreams. In your book, you actually give a quote from your father that says, "No one will ever care about your life as much as you do." Why does that quote resonate with you so much?
It's so awesome that you would start there, because it's probably one of the most tender things in the book. So, because the reality is that when my father said it was, I had a habit growing up of turning maybe some not so good situations into the best it could, right? So I think that has stayed with me my whole life. So I've always, and I like that of myself. I like the fact that I've kind of found the positive in some things that weren't maybe said or done in a positive way. And this is one of them, because I suspect in the moment in which he said it to me, it was very much of, you're alone, you're on your own, kid, like figure out your own problems, But what I took from that was a sense of personal responsibility in a positive way, that, no one's going to care about my life as much as I am. So therefore, hey, I better take care of my life, and that's largely why I decided to become self-employed, because the way I saw myself at that point in my life, I would say I was about the age of probably 12 or 13 when he said this. It was like the only occasion I can think of. I remember being out for breakfast with my father alone. And I was probably about 12 or 13 years old. And that stuck with me and actually became largely why I chose to become self-employed. Because at that point in my life, I saw myself as having very little value. I had very low self-esteem, very low sense of self-worth. And that kind of that phrasing kind of motivated me to say, well, hey, if no one's going to care about my life as much as I do, I better take care of my life. And to me, self-employment seemed like the best route, because I didn't have confidence that someone would hire me. I didn't feel hireable. I didn't I didn't see higher education as a path because I had two older brothers that didn't have that opportunity, and it economically wasn't in my family's choices. So it really just caused me to step, and I'm grateful for the phrase because it really caused me to step up and say, okay, then let's do this. Let's take care of my own life. It also helped me later on as an employer because I realized that to ever expect, no matter how great of an employee you have, to ever expect them to care as much about your business as you do is an unfair expectation to put on them. So I therefore, as an employer, just learn to just hire really awesome people and allow them to bring out the best in themselves with an understanding of appropriate boundaries that they're, and I had great employees. I created a good culture, but at the end of the day, they're never going to care as much about that business as I do because it's my life that's on the line when you're self-employed. So like I said, it was said very snarky to me, but it wound up being a very positive and I think positively inspiring thing. And like I said, largely why I chose to just take the route in life of being self-employed, which I have been my entire life. I've never had a traditional job because I just decided, well, that I'm going to take care of my life.
Jeffrey, why did that quote not stick as a snarky kind of cutting comment? It's surprising to hear that it was delivered in that way. For a kid, like you said, who struggled, who went through challenges, you write about in the book being very shy and buying self-help books at a young age. Like,
yeah.
Why did that comment not cut to your heart in the way that perhaps it was delivered?
Yeah. It was either, it's funny, I never thought about this before because I early on in the book tell the story about selling eggs door to door. So I never thought about the irony of me saying that we never know what comes first, the chicken or the egg, because I don't know whether I innately had a skill set which caused me to reframe things, or if I learned that as a survival technique. I'm really not sure. I suspect, honestly, Michael, probably it was a skill set I learned to survive the environment in which I was in. And, for better or worse, I've said recently, actually, to a friend who was really struggling through these difficult times we're going through emotionally. And I'd said to her, I said, well, for me, I'm a masterful compartmentalizer. Like I can compartmentalize incredibly well, for better or worse, but I actually think it is, it can save your sanity if you can compartmentalize, particularly when you are an entrepreneur and self-employed, because I'll tell you what, I have had some crazy situations where I have had to, step on stage right before really bad family news was delivered about my family. Help, my father, the same father I just referred to, he died the day of my wedding. Right. So you talk about compartmentalization. I mean, literally at his wake, people were congratulating me and offering me their sympathy at the same time. So by chance or by circumstance, who knows, but I've always, either I developed it or it was innately in me, but let me deal with the task at hand and compartmentalize a little bit. So I just think I had a way of just constantly reframing. And as I did in that case, I reframed it. I took from it the best I could with it, because at the end of the day, and I think maybe this really gets to the heart of it, and I do talk about this in the book, that, all humbleness aside, all humility, all socialization, I really believe most of us have a much higher opinion of ourselves than we let the world see. And while part of me saw myself as someone with little value or low self-esteem at that point in my life, it was more of a reflection of how I thought people saw me. But if I asked myself deep down what I thought of myself, I thought I was pretty awesome. Like I really saw, I saw in myself the potential to grow into somebody I could be really proud of. Even though I never got the external validation, I turned to internal validation for that. And I think that's true of a lot of people. If I have asked a lot of people, look, if you put all your humbleness aside, don't you think that you're kind of special? I'm like, yeah, I kind of do. I'm like, yeah, so do I. It just takes us a little while, I think, to get underneath the imposed modesty that we think we're supposed to have, to dig to our own truth that we think we're pretty awesome. And I think we just need to step into that a little bit more.
Where's the boundary that we draw there, Jeffrey, between that, and you even write about this in the book, the imposed modesty, as you just phrased it, and the inability to accept compliments, to accept praise, or the perceived inability, and how we actually truly think. Where's the line? Where's the disconnect there between how we actually feel about ourselves and what we actually want to portray to the world?
Well, I guess the goal is for there not to be a disconnect. If we're worried, I work for the people that I coach. It's always fascinating to me how often people will literally say the words like, if I'm successful, I'm afraid I'll become that person. I'm like, who's that person? Somehow people think that's where the roots of the fear of success. Somehow people think they're going to turn into a model of poorly behaved success that they may have seen in someone else. But it's not the success that's going to change. It can, and sure, some people do. But my feeling is, especially the people I work with, like they're purpose-driven, heart-centered. They're so far from becoming a jerk because of success that you need to set that aside. And I would say that's true of most people. I mean, believe me, there are plenty of self-centered, narcissistic, foolish acting, people in the world. But you know what? That actually, they're probably speaking their truth. That's kind of who they are and how they behave. But, the majority of people, certainly the people I choose to be around with, they're so heart-centered. The fact that you can, if you can question, the moment you question whether you might become somebody you don't like, tells me that you're very unlikely to become that because you're through the questioning, right? Right down to the nature of your show, follow-up question, right? By asking yourself the question, that actually says a lot about your character.
Throughout the rest of my conversation with Jeffrey, it's really an expansion of that idea that, deep down, we all think we're pretty awesome. And tapping into and seeing your own potential is really what entrepreneurship and self-employment is all about. You're betting on yourself. Jeffrey is huge, and you'll hear this in our conversation, how your success in these endeavors, your success is proportional to your personal development. Getting better, having the self-awareness to understand where you might need to improve, and at the same time separating professional rejection from personal rejection. It can be very hard when your business is yours and you are the face and you are the brand to do exactly that. But we talk about how that's possible. And be sure to listen to the end of this conversation where it gets into some very real, very personal places with Jeffrey in how he sees the world with everything that he has gone through the totality of his life, culminating with now his book, The Self-Employed Life. Enjoy the rest of the conversation. I want to probe a little bit here, so forgive me if I go too deep, but what were you struggling with, Jeffrey, at such a young age in that made you question your worth?
I know we like to believe that we are all born, and I suppose it's true that we are born pure, untainted, but I don't know. Maybe we're born with different levels of self-worth to begin with. I don't know exactly. I mean, I knew what I was dealing with, but I don't know the roots of it. But I will tell you this. It was at the age of 39 that through a dream, and to be honest with you, I was never somebody that would think this was possible. Because I would say I can get as woo-woo as anybody, but I'm also very logical minded. Like I play on both fields. But at the age of 39, I had a dream. It was the night before Mother's Day. And I know that very specifically on my 39th year, I had this vivid dream that had something to do with a white wicker hamper and clowns painted on it. And it was so vivid that it caused me to question. So the next day was Mother's Day. I was gathering with my family. And I asked my mother, I said, Mom, I had this dream last night that was profoundly vivid about a white wicker hamper and clowns. And she kind of turned an off shade of a color. And I thought that was peculiar. And she said, well, that was the hamper in your bedroom when you were a kid. I'm like, but why was that significant? It was the first time at 39 years old, she had told me that when I was a young child, probably prior to the age of 2, that my legs were badly curved and badly damaged. So my legs were broken and reset with bars on the legs as well as between the legs, like Forrest Gump. Is the first thing I thought of. It's like, oh, like Forrest Gump. At 39 years old, I'm finding this out. Now, mind you, 8 years prior, I had been paralyzed for 4 months due to a back injury, which then led to surgery, which then led to the realization that my pelvis was completely tilted, which is likely what caused the injury and the paralysis and all this. Now, you'd think that maybe knowing that my legs had been broken and reset when I was a kid might have helped. And even still, that was never revealed to me. So what I take from that is how damaging it must have been as a 2-year-old kid, that probably those clowns on the hamper were probably my best company. I have a feeling that I was left alone a lot during this situation of my legs being broken and reset. That's so to me, there's a root of how I felt about who I was and the situation I was in. Because all I could imagine was this little boy at 2 years old or younger, obviously spending a lot of time looking at that hamper from his bed, such that those clowns became my friends. And here I was at 39 years old finding out about this full time. So, maybe we're born pure and confident, but the damage to our psyche can be done so early. So I just must have adopted very young a sense of not being worthwhile paying attention to. Now, granted, I was the youngest of 3 boys. I'm sure they had their hands full with my older brothers, but I don't necessarily excuse the what I suspect was a fair amount of abandonment.
Yeah. Wow. Gosh.
I've never told that story, by the way.
Well, thank you for sharing it here. My goodness. What about then the self-employed life attracted someone who was so deep within themselves and withdrawn and had these feelings and emotions? What about the self-employed life drew you out? Because that's what it seems like it did. In reading your book, it seems like that gives you life, that gives you energy, and coaching others to do that. What attracted you there?
Yeah,
that's the question.
On the surface, what attracted me to it, because being the self-employed life, it felt isolating. So I thought that this would be a way I would not have to have coworkers. I would not have to have a boss. Like I thought it would be an isolating situation. And unfortunately for many people, it is. But the irony was that as a profession, initially, I chose to be a photographer because, again, very isolating, right? I could be in the darkroom back in the day. I mean, I would spend a lot of time in my dark. That's how I survived high school. I just hung out in the darkroom the whole time. And of course, when I was out in the world photographing, there was always a camera between me and the world. So I was hiding. I chose a profession that I knew I was talented in it, but it also felt ideal because I would be so isolated. The irony was I was really good at it. So next thing I knew, I was getting national awards in high school. My photographs were on tour and I had to go to New York City for a cocktail reception. And then I went off to photography school. I won every award in the photography school imaginable, right down to the fact that the student body chose me to be the student representative and speak at graduation in front of, the entire student body and their parents and family. So the irony was the isolated career I chose propelled me to center stage. But that's what I think the power of being self-employed is, honestly. I really believe the power of being self-employed is that we do in some way or one way or another put ourselves on the world stage and we're putting ourselves out there. And the reason I think the greatest motivator to do that is I think deep down, just as I was as that little kid, I really believe deep down we want to find the boldest versions of ourselves, that we do believe that we're capable of more. And for me, self-employment has been 99% personal development. And I don't think there's any way that you can develop yourself better as a person than becoming self-employed, because everything about being self-employed is asking you to rise to a bigger version of yourself, while at the same time, you are constantly bombarded by everything that could possibly push your button. And you're asked, rising to that, whether it's a change in the world, whether it's a global pandemic or a change in the economy, or somebody says something to you that hurts your feelings or insults your work or criticize. I mean, every personal button you can possibly harbor is going to be pushed, to the extent that I often look at self-employment as personal development on steroids, right? So you grow quick. And I think for a lot of people, that's a big driver as to if they don't appreciate that when they become self-employed, it's what keeps them going. And I think in the end, we choose to do what we choose to do in life because what we can gain from that is greater than the fear. And for me, as scared as I was as a kid, 14 years old, selling eggs door to door, which was my first entrepreneurial venture, the rewards I quickly saw were greater than the fear. The rewards for me to find more in myself, the reward for me to gain my independence, for the reward for me to see the possibility that I could make it on my own was far greater than the fear. And that, I believe, is often what keeps us going.
That commitment to personal development that you just spoke of, do we take that seriously enough? Do the people that you work with take that seriously enough? Are they taking it seriously enough when they first come to work with you?
I think the people that, again, I think to become self-employed, you have there's some inkling in you that really enjoys personal development anyway. And I certainly find the people that come to me to work with it, they're already seekers. They're innately seekers. They may not know how powerful being self-employed is going to be, but I do believe they are innately seekers. Whether they take it serious enough, here's the part that I believe is missing, is that most people don't realize until it's pointed out to them, which I do in the book, is that your level of success is proportionate to your personal development when you're self-employed. And I frame it as capacity. The fact of the matter is, you can keep applying, and this is why so many self-employed business owners feel like a hamster on a wheel. They just keep working really hard, but hardly getting ahead, or pounding it away and not really, feeling any relief. The reason is that we have been conditioned, and we need to apply a lot of action, right? We innately put in a lot of action, a lot of effort. The problem is, without the personal development, you haven't created the capacity to receive that additional effort. And by capacity, I mean your ability to believe that you deserve more than you currently have. I think about how hard it is for people to actually feel like they deserve greatness. They deserve abundance. They deserve money. It's so hard for people to even get bigger than their current state about what they deserve. Right. So that needs that capacity of what you think you deserve now and what you deserve in the future. That has to be expanded. You have to do the personal work to shut down thoughts that are limiting you, your limited beliefs, the things that are keeping you smaller. You have to work with your own sense of expectation. My TEDx talk is largely about how do we get beyond our own predetermined expectation? Because expectation, by definition, I don't care how big you expect to be, expectation by definition is a predetermined outcome. How do you get beyond that? Well, my answer that I offer in my TEDx talk is that often people see more in us than we see in ourselves. Listen to them, believe them, right? So we need to tap into, what do you see in my potential? It's probably greater than what you see in yourself. This is all the personal development work that we must do to actually gain more success. Because particularly when you're self-employed, your success is proportionate to your personal development. So I do believe people that are drawn to self-employment are seekers. Certainly those that I work with are. I think what they're overlooking is the correlation. And therefore, every time they want more success, they keep pounding out more effort because nobody's really told them, no, work from the inside out. Do the inside work, increase the capacity, both emotionally and literally. I talk about in the book about systems. So many businesses, in a very logical sense, they have systems set up in their business for their current state of business. But it's a measure and symbol of expansion if you create systems in your business for the business of your future, right? So that you have, whether it's the database you choose or the software you use for workflow, use a system that's bigger than what you need right now for the business to come, right? Not only are you prepared, it becomes a manifestation and a mindset that you're expanding and growing. That's what I mean by all the measures of personal development, increasing the capacity so the effort you put in has a place to fit.
Has it been hard? You described the story of the wicker basket with the clowns and those feelings of abandonment or perhaps being alone. I've got to imagine that being self-employed feels like an island a lot of times, and that perhaps rejection feels like a rejection of you, not perhaps your work. What kind of development have you done, Jeffrey, to make sure that those thoughts don't creep in? Or do those thoughts creep in? Perhaps is the better question.
They absolutely creep in.
Yeah.
I mean, I am still by nature, and it's funny how much I slow down to hesitate to say that I'm still an introvert, because I don't like to constantly reinforce that, but I don't mind, and again, there's the question of how do you define introversion? I mean, by definition, it's how do you regain energy versus how much time you like to be alone. And I think those two things can be contradictory. I actually like to be alone, but I tend to regain energy in crowds. Like when I lived in New York City, I live in Miami now, but when I lived in New York City, I would actually, when I wanted to be recharged, I would go to Times Square, because ironically, even though you're surrounded with people, there's no place that nobody's going to notice you more than a place like Times Square. So in a way, it was isolating amongst a crowd of people. Like I would just take a walk because the energy of it would recharge me. And yet, just being the nature of Times Square, I could be walking around naked and nobody would notice. So it in a way, it's already isolating. So, but I'm very comfortable being alone. I'm very comfortable working alone. So that doesn't trigger me. I absolutely, struggle with comparison. As much as comparing myself to where I think I should be, as much as I compare myself to others. The difference is the recovery time. I think as we mature both in age and in our experience, we just learn to snap out of it quicker. I know you interviewed Leslie M., who wrote the book Swagger. And Swagger has become a huge anchor for me, because I will check in with myself. It's like, if something's on my mind, I'm like, Jeff, you got this. Like, you've got swagger. It's like it becomes something you can call upon. So I think a lot of it has to do with recovery time. I just don't stay stuck in a mindset that's going to drag me down, perhaps as long as I would have in the past.
You just mentioned comparing your current self to where you think you should be or where you want to be. And you bring up the concept in the book of from-to statements. Can you dive into that? What is a from-to statement, and how does that help, particularly someone who's self-employed, expand and grow as an entrepreneur and business owner?
Yeah. I am a trained coach. I've received over 1,000 hours of training as a coach. And there's a lot I love about coaching and what coaches can do for others. However, in the purest form of coach training, it's too passive for me. And I tell my clients, I'm not a passive coach. I'm not sitting back waiting for you to find it. It's like I refer to what I do as a coach as pointing. I never assume I'm right. I mean, I can be, because I've got 36 years of business experience. So there might be something I know, but what I would prefer to look at is pointing. And I trust a lot of my gut instinct to say, I have a thought for you, or I have a thought that this might be best for you. Or I have a thought on your brand message or what's most marketable, and I'll point them, and then I'll ask them to do the work to marinate with it and see if it resonates for them. So by nature, I like to play in the balance between passive and action. So, I'm not, like I said, so I'm not just sitting back letting my clients passively find themselves. So what I teach and what I demonstrate a lot in the book is I like to have actions that have tangible results. So, and I like to break it down in short increments and have a very tangible result, because of who I'm speaking to, self-employed business owners. They don't have a lot of time and they want results. So the from-to format was the way that I learned to set intentions, because I feel like the way people set intentions tends to be too loose. I intend on being successful. Well, what is that? What does it look like? What does it feel like? What is success? That's too vague. So the from-to format is getting very clear. I want to go from this to this. I want to go from not having enough money to pay my bills to having more than enough money to pay my bills. I want to go from feeling like I'm not, getting recognition for my work to being highly recognized for my work, right? So every intention that you set has a very clear, what do you want to go from and what do you want to go to? And that's the way you recite your intention in your brain, because it's something your mind can grab onto. And the process of working with my clients and getting there forces them to get really clear on what they want to get from and what they want to go to. So I frame everything in a from to format.
How do we turn that into action then, Jeffrey? How do we take intention and actually begin to put tangible steps and actions to actually becoming that to version of ourselves?
Well, in the book, I start the personal development section off by helping my clients and the readers to get very clear on, in a big picture, what it is that they want to get away from. Because I believe that has to be the initial motivator. I've spent a lot of time looking at, and from personal observation, I've actually done some research on this too, but the research is so contradictory, it offers you no help. So then I just started relying on my own personal experience around motivation. Like, what really motivates us? Is it what we want to get away from? Is it what we want to go towards? Because I feel like for the most part, motivation is presented as something we want to go towards. We're motivated towards the dangling carrot. But I began challenging that because I question its ability to keep us going. And keep going is a big part of self-employment, right? Keep going through the toughest time is one of our biggest challenges. So I looked at the dangling carrot reward model of motivation and felt like it didn't really stick. And I found what really stuck for me, and then I started leveraging it with my clients, is getting really clear on what the hell I wanted to get away from. Like, what I'm so sick and tired of experiencing that I'm ready to actually do something about it so that I never go back to it. And I use the word, it's funny, I use the word hate in the book. It said it has to be what you've grown to hate and you want to get away from. And a couple of my advanced readers thought it was too harsh. I'm like, how can that be too harsh? Like, I mean, isn't that the problem? Like, if you're not willing to say, oh my gosh, I hate being broke. I'm done with it. I hate not having enough money to pay my bills. If you're not willing to get there, then what the hell is the motivation to do something about it? So that to me is the jumping point of motivation. I look at it as, and I've come up with a couple of metaphors. One is I'm an avid kayaker. I live here in Miami. My partner and I go sea kayaking all the time. And I started looking at the difference between it's a two-person kayak. And I started looking at the difference between pushing and pulling. And I realized that when I take the front of the kayak, only because I can sit with my legs crossed and he can't, because I practice yoga. But I looked at what would happen when he stops rowing. We almost go nowhere because we're fighting the current, and it's really hard for me to, get any power as the front man. But if I stop rowing, we still keep going forward, like by his energy. And I realized it's the difference between when you're pulling, right? So as the front man, I'm pulling. When he stops rowing, I'm pulling the weight of the kayak, pulling the weight, his weight, I'm pulling. And I realized it's like a metaphor for life. Like, when we're carrying the weight behind us, we can't get anywhere, right? That's the pull. So what I realized is it's the push that gets us going. It's the push that creates momentum. And as the back guy, because we kept going, when he would paddle, we maintained momentum. Why? Because we're pushing. And I realized that's fundamental to the beginning of momentum to create motivation, is to get people to get clear on what they want to get away from, what you want to push away from in order to get going with momentum. Then the dangling carrots of motivation might keep you going. But you have to have that. You have to be really clear on what it is that you do not want to circle back around in life. Whether, it's true of addiction, it's true of, so many issues. What it takes is getting clear on what you don't want to return to so that you keep going.
Jeffrey, for you said you've got 36 years of business experience in doing this and never been, having a quote unquote traditional job. Does that change? Has that changed specifically for you over time? Is there still something that you are trying to push away from, or is it the dangling carrot now that keeps you motivated?
I think there's always something you're trying to push away from. And I've also had a number of transitions in my career. Most significantly is my transition, if you will, from photographer to speaker, author, coach, and which has been 12 years in the making. I still do very little photography, and it's been 36 years that I've been a portrait photographer for very affluent families. I had a killer career as a photographer, very unique. And I still do very little of it, but it's been over the last 12 years that I've kind of been ramping down a little bit in order to make room for this work that I want to do today. So, there's, with transition always comes some things that you kind of want to get away from. I would say at this point in my life, there's not a lot I want to get away from. I've worked really hard in my life, both in action as well as personal development, probably even more so personal development, to really create a life, which I've always been very clear on, to create a life that how I want to live has always led my decisions in business. It's why I live in Miami. It was a personal decision. I came down here for 3 months and decided never to leave. And that was 5.5 years ago. And it was just because I liked the environment. I just found that living by the ocean and all the power of the ocean and the beach, and Miami is a very happy place. Like, people are innately happy. I had 70% Latin. And I think, not only is it a great culture, it's fascinating to live somewhere where everybody's from somewhere else. There's a lot of questions to ask, a lot to learn. And I also find people in a culture like this are innately grateful for being here because they've all escaped something. They all left some country that was dominated by communism or political upheaval or not enough possibility, and they came here. So they are innately happy. Like, they live with a profound gratefulness that I've never found any place else I've lived in my life. So all that considered, I was like, this is where I want to be. So I decided to move here and then just restructure my career, my business accordingly. So when you do that, when you live your life leading by how you want to live and make your decisions accordingly, you end up kind of where I am today. Like, there's not a whole lot I want to get away from. I've kind of got everything I want, and do so in a way that it's not overly abundant. I mean, I live relatively, minimally. I don't need a lot. Simple, I have a Mini Cooper as a car. It's not like I need a luxury vehicle. I just like my cute little Mini Cooper with the top down, So yeah, not a lot I want to get away from at this point, I can say.
Understood. You write about in the book our tendency to hold up successful people to a higher standard of well-being, I believe you put it. And an example would be someone who is a financial advisor having their own personal, financial struggles, and how we so often think like, well, you're having struggles, so how can you dare teach? Jeffrey, what do you struggle with right now that you're teaching others to overcome in their own life?
Oh my gosh, you're really going for it, aren't you? But I find it to be first of all, I think it's an unfair expectation. I always, when I watch public figures, and that just doesn't mean celebrities, but people that I know that are even professional speakers and such, that may not be a household name by any means, but nonetheless, they have a public image. And, I may know what's going on in their personal lives, and I can see people struggle, particularly now in social media. I think a lot of us struggle between, authenticity and imposter syndrome. And I don't think it's inauthentic. And this is the point I make in the book. I don't think it is inauthentic for someone to be putting out in public, or I should say maintaining their public image, while it may not be the truth of the moment of what's going on at home. And I don't, especially if the person is doing so with integrity, because I know in my case, if I'm going through a more difficult time personally, I've learned to not share the lessons of that difficult time until after the fact. Because in the moment, a couple things can happen. You can be too emotional about what's going on for you to the point that you're either centering yourself or you're just spewing too much. And then secondly, if you're in a leadership position, I think you have to not disappoint people that are used to leaning on you. And it's a very delicate balance, right? Because we also know we want to share our vulnerability. So what I've learned to do is I am very honest. I'm very open. It often comes back to me to shock me when people know things about me. I'm like, oh my gosh, I actually said that out loud. I sometimes forget how transparent I can be. And, but it's always done, so in balance, like I said, with leadership and vulnerability. As far as, to get to the root of your question now, I would say I'm still trying to get my financial house in order to the degree that I want it to be once again. I made a lot of money as a photographer, and in hindsight, I realized I was a spoiled brat. It's like, wow, that was easy. And maybe it wasn't so easy when I was in my 20s starting it, but honestly, you know what? It really kind of was. I mean, I hit it right in the right place at the right time with, being very clear. I had a very clear mission and very clear brand message, and I knew what I was going for. So I will give myself credit for what I built. But in hindsight, I mean, I was 20 years old and I had like a 7-figure business, and my salary was over $500,000. And I think I was 30 years old, and I'm bringing home $500,000 and a year in salary. And so, I had a really good. So for me to have transitioned from a very lucrative career to what I do now as a speaker, author, it's been financially challenging, but I can't complain about it because I still do really well. And that's that balance I was saying a minute ago. It's like, it would be inappropriate for me to complain about, I have a beautiful apartment on the beach in Miami, and, it would be really inappropriate. But at the same time, I haven't yet met my own standards. I've met my standard of living, although there's like one bump up. I look at it as one bump. It's like, there's one bump up I'd like financially to really just be totally acing it. But, I do know, like, many of the clients I coach are killing it. Like, they do financially better than I do. And I'm okay with that. That doesn't cause any issues for me, because it's the person and it's what they bring to the table. So I'd say that's one thing that I'm probably, I think most people assume. And like I said, it would be inappropriate for me to say I'm not doing well, I'm not living comfortably and have a nice life. But I think often people think it's more comfortable than it really is. Because that's behind the scenes, I'm still working on achieving my own financial touch points, and yet at the same time doing the work. Like, I've also let go of not wanting or needing for it to be what it used to be. I don't have the same, I have 3 grown kids. I don't have the same financial obligations. But the challenge for me internally is that I'm so competitive with myself. I feel like I'm trying to match a previous existence that I don't even need or want anymore. I don't actually want to work that hard. So that, I would say, is something that, and again, once again, I don't know that it's a great question you've asked, because it's inviting me to be more transparent than I usually am.
What questions can we ask as self-employed, self-starting individuals to guard against being unauthentic or misrepresenting our authenticity to the point where perhaps it's fake it till you make it? Leslie M. talked about the ridiculousness of fake it till you make it, but what questions can we ask ourselves that guard against that?
Yeah, 2 things I've done in my own personal development that have helped tremendously with that. One is to do the work with a mutual friend of Leslie and I's, Brant Mansoir. Brant wrote a book called Black Sheep, and it is about finding your black sheep core values. And black sheep values, because like the wool of a black sheep, it can't be dyed. It can't be changed. So it's doing the work to get in touch with your core values that are unchangeable. So when you have those, it enables you to have an anchor. I will literally ask myself many times, even before I'm very vocal on social media, on my personal social media anyway. But I will often ask myself before I spew, I'll say, what value is this representing? And that's my anchor to check in with myself, so that I'm actually owning a value before I say anything. The second thing I use a lot, and ironically you would ask this because I literally just posted this on my Instagram, because it's 2 weeks from today that my book comes out. And I explained my for the sake of, and I describe it as the 4 simple words I live by. And they are for the sake of. I ask myself that all the time. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this for the sake of. And for the sake of has to be bigger than me. I'm not posting this for the sake of bragging about myself. I'm not posting this because I think I'm a big deal. I'm saying something or taking action very clear on, I'm doing this for the sake of service to someone else. And that helps a lot with authenticity, because it helps me define how much and when to share. I'm sharing this personal story, like I said, almost always in hindsight, but I will share it for the sake of maybe helping somebody else in the same situation. I'm being as vulnerable or being as personal as I am for the sake of. So it's this way for me. It's not, I'm just telling you my life story, or I'm telling you this bad thing that happened to me, or a big lesson I learned for the sake of me just drawing attention to myself. It's for the sake of. So sometimes when I ask myself that question, why do I want to share this? What's it for the sake of? And if I can't find it, sharing it for the sake of some other bigger purpose or for someone else, I don't, because then I feel like, well, then I'm just really wanting just to talk about myself. And that's not a big enough reason. That has helped me tremendously. Those two things, getting clear on my values and just asking myself the question, what am I doing this for the sake of? And that has helped me clarify how transparent and vulnerable to be, and where to draw the boundary to just being, just saying what you want.
Does that question, or does that statement for the sake of, help someone who's small, who is self-employed, who is just starting out? Does that help them get through the gray time where the results haven't come yet? You're building. You've got this vision, you've got these intentions, and nobody sees it yet.
Yeah, it does. And it also, in the book, I'm very clear to point out, because that's so frequent, and it's, I would say, the most frustrating stage of business and personal development is when we make changes and we're not seeing the results of that change yet. So I call it growth jet lag. Whether it's growth in your person or growth in your business, there's always going to be a point where you have made changes that the world has not caught up to seeing yet, right? And particularly on a personal level, I think particularly when you have personally developed, when you've done the inner work to grow yourself, not everybody's caught up with that yet. So for the sake of can absolutely keep you going, because you can it's a reminder of yourself. I've done this work for the sake of XYZ. If you look at an extreme example, would be somebody who's battled an addiction of some sort and stops that addiction for the sake of saving their family. And in that moment when they might battle their inclination, that probably could be the most important reminder that they need is, I chose to stop for the sake of saving my family. So I think absolutely the for the sake of can help you keep going through the difficult times, as well as, I said, understanding your values and why you're doing what you're doing. And I also think even at very early stages, asking yourself for the sake of, for me, it was a big part of how I came to write this book, right? I had an idea, as we often do. Things start with an idea. I had an idea about a book I wanted to write, but I had to really ask myself, well, for the sake of what? Right? Who's it going to serve? How is it going to serve? And that for the sake of got bigger than I anticipated, because I started writing the book prior to the pandemic. And next thing I know, we have a global pandemic with the highest rate of unemployment we've ever known in the US, which means it's going to be the highest increase of self-employment we've ever known, which means there's also, people have lost their job trying to find their way. And on top of that, I started thinking about, what about the millions of people who do still have their job, but they're reevaluating their life, right? So the forsake of this book became so much bigger once I was in it, that I said to my publisher, I think this feels like maybe the only time in my life, because I always thought my timing was a little off. I'm either a little ahead or a little behind things. This might be the first time I feel like the timing is incredible. I mean, this book comes out like now, and it's exactly, I think, when self-employed people need it, because either they're small businesses that have been harmed by the lockdown, and this content can help them get back on their feet. It's for people that have lost their jobs and they're turning to self-employment for the first time. And it's for people who are sitting in their high-paying corporate job and looking at life and just saying, man, if we haven't learned that life is short now, what's it going to take? Maybe I want to do something more purpose-driven at this point in my life. That's why in the book, It was already planned, but it became, again, more a bigger for the sake of. In the book, there's an entire chapter on what I refer to as midlife self-employed people, right? Because that's a massive trend. People in their 40s, 50s, and 60s leaving high-paying corporate jobs to become self-employed. And I coach. That's my one-to-one coaching. That's most of who I coach, one-to-one, are people in that position. That's a huge trend. Why? Because at 50 and 60 years old, we're looking at our lives and saying, it's this weird, and I'm there. I just turned 57. And it's this odd balance of life when you're like, part of me knows that I'm going to live to 100. I've already told my kids, plan on it. Like, I've got another 44 years left. So there's so much ambition bottled up in a 50, 60, and 70-year-old now that we're not even close to stopping. In fact, we may feel like we're just beginning because we're doing something more purposeful. And yet we're not blind to the fact that life has an ending. So it's actually a wonderful stage to be in, where you're living so in the present and in the future. It's like the ultimate balance. And so there's a huge trend towards people in midlife between 50 and 70 or 40 and 70 venturing out on their own to start businesses. And next thing I know, this book fulfills that as well. So the for sake of for the book became so much bigger. But early on, I asked myself those questions. Why am I writing this book? Who is it for the sake, or who or what is it for the sake of?
Jeffrey, to loop it back around to another quote that you used in the book, and I won't give too much away so people can read it for themselves, but you quote a piece from an artist, Peter Tooney. Am I saying his name right?
You are, yeah.
Expectations are the blueprint for disappointment is the quote.
Yeah.
You just outlined your for the sake of statement for your book. I'm interested in hearing how appropriate the timing is of a book like this. How do you deem and judge success? If expectations are the blueprint for disappointment, are you going in with expectations? How do you frame what this book's mission out there in the world will be?
Yeah. Oh gosh. And the story behind that piece of art, it's one of the most profound stories. It's probably one of my favorent parts of the entire book.
It's fantastic.
The end of the book,
I highlighted it.
Crazy story, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's the last chapter.
Yep.
But there's a big message in that, but we're not going to go into that, but I will talk about the quote itself. So, and it's a massive piece of art that hangs in my living room, and that's the result of the story. It is, let me put it to you this way, Michael. I don't know for sure, but there's a very good chance my next book is going to be about paradoxes, because I'm fascinated by paradoxes, and I always have been. And I already have some preliminary outline of what a book like that might look like. Reason being is that we live in a world that is constantly trying to make us look at things in black and white, but it's just not. Life is I don't even want to say it's messy. It's just beautifully gray, right? There's the sweet spot is what exists between what appear to be opposites. And it is inevitable that we're going to have expectations. It's inevitable when you write a book, or I just organized and hosted a 2-day online summit. So of course I had expectations of what the registrations were going to look like. And guess what? Of course they didn't meet my expectations. So it's impossible to not have expectations. The difference is, and I think the key to life and why I would be inspired to write this book about motivation, it really comes down to living in a way that you have the ability to expect more of yourself, to have expectations, and not be attached to the outcome. It's that, to me, is the ultimate lesson in life. I've studied yoga for a lot of years. I've studied Buddhism. There's a hand gesture in Buddhism, which is common amongst a lot of Buddhist statues, which is the hand gesture of effort and surrender, which is an upward hand representing the flame of effort, and a open palm representing receiving. That's the surrender part. I tell you what, that is the answer to life. The answer to life is finding a comfortable place between effort and surrender. And it is not easy. And I'll share with you a personal story of how I learned a profound lesson about effort and surrender. Is my yoga teacher of 13 years was strict with a very fast moving cancer. It was cancer of the abdominal wall, which I didn't even know existed. And of course, when someone is upheld as the icon of yoga, and she really was. I mean, it was Iyengar yoga is what I studied. And her mother brought Mr. Iyengar to the United States to introduce this type of yoga. So this is a lifelong venture for her. And I think she was 63 when she got cancer and passed. And she passed within 3 months. But there's a short window of time during those 3 months from diagnosis to when she passed that I had some time with her. And one day I asked her, I said, Mary, how are you really doing? And at this point, she had, given her best effort to chemotherapy. She had lost all her hair. So I was sitting with her in a quiet moment at the yoga studio with her, her scarf on her head. And I said to her, Mary, how are you really doing? And she looked at me and she said, I am learning to walk towards life without being attached to the outcome. And that to me was the ultimate life lesson. I was like, that's how we all need to live, right? I mean, we have to give it our all. We have to have expectations. We have to set goals, but we have to, and she was setting a goal to live her life. She was trying to save her life. She was criticized, hopefully behind her, but she was criticized by some people. I heard criticizing her for choosing Western medication because she was a yogini, right? She's supposed to be all natural. And, she shouldn't be choosing chemotherapy. And first of all, it's none of anybody's business. And the fact of the matter is that that's where her effort lied, right? She chose, even as someone who had lived her life in the most holistic and natural manner possible, she was giving it her all, putting all her effort in. And that included traditional Western medicine. And she was beautifully unattached to the outcome. And she passed shortly after. And I have to believe, based on that conversation, that she passed with such peace of mind because she truly embodied not being attached to the outcome. So that's kind of how I live my life. Of course, I have expectations, and I whine when I don't meet my expectations briefly, because then I fall into that place like, okay, what's next? I joke sometimes that I've got the musical taste of a 14-year-old girl, and I'm a huge Ariana Grande fan. And I've got a baseball hat after one of her songs, which says, "Thank you, next." And I proudly wear my Ariana Grande hat. But I kind of look at that, a lot of things that way. It's like, of course I whine when my expectations aren't met for a day. And then I'm like, okay, thank you, next. And move on, because I do try to live my life in a way that I don't stay overly attached to that which hooks me, and just move on.
Jeffrey, what's a question that you wish you were asked more?
A question I wished I was asked more. Honestly, you've asked so many great questions. I wish, I think I wished, and not that I haven't shared it, but I wish I was asked more about what was really going on for me when I came out at the age of 44 years old. I certainly have shared the story, and people have asked, and I've been very open about, the challenges of that, but there's more. And I wish people asked how that affected I wish people would ask how that has informed how I see the world, because, as I like to say, I lived life on both sides of the fence. I was married for 19 years. I was married at the age of 20. I was married for 19 years till the age of 39, divorced, had 3 kids, continued to date women. My truth revealed itself, and I came out at 44 years old. And undoubtedly, I could share all day long perspectives and views I have about society and politics because of that experience. And when I came out, marriage wasn't legal. And it was an astonishing thing for my brain to be like, I'm the same person. I'm the same man who raised 3 fantastic kids. I have the same values. But now I don't have the same rights by law, because of who I choose to love, and the work, the painful work I did within myself to really allow my truth to reveal itself. And the reward for that is that I can't marry who I choose to, and that marriage can't be recognized on a federal level. And I can't, if I were to have a partner for 25 years, can't come to the hospital at my deathbed. Like it's mind bending, Michael, when you've lived life on both sides. And there's so many social and political issues that we could look at that way. that I wish people would ask more about how that experience. I don't need to tell the whole coming out story, but what I don't think anybody's ever asked me is, how did that change your perspective on our country and our world? And I just shared a little bit about that, but yeah, that's something I wish people asked more. And I think we should ask that more of other people. We all go through such big life changes. Why don't we ask more, not about the change, but we should ask more, how has that changed your perspective on how you see the world? How does that change your perspective on our society? That's the question that's the follow-up question we need to ask.
I love that. I love how you framed that right there at the end. Jeffrey, I know you just went into it a little bit, but I do want to ask the question. Perhaps, what is the biggest truth? What is the biggest perspective shift? What to ask the question that you want to be asked? What has that been like?
Well, certainly, and I'm thrilled that we've seen change, right? We've seen some legal change. But to have gone from what is so ordinary, being straight, married, living in a beautiful country Connecticut town, literally with the white picket fence, and to have gone from that to coming out, which was for the most part widely embraced. I had a pretty easy coming out journey. But it is mind-bending that my partner and I now can walk down the street and people will yell faggot out at us. Like, what world is this? This is 2021. Right? I mean, the assumption, it's bizarre. And I'm not talking about walking down the street holding hands. Just the assumption. I mean, I've checked into hotels in a southern state that refuse to give us a room with a single king bed. They put us in a room with two. Said no. But I reserved a room with a king bed. No, we don't do that here. 2 queen beds is what you have. I'm like, you've got to be kidding. and it's, people don't realize if you live a heteronormal straight white life, you can't fathom. And for me, it's given me, like I said, a view from both sides of the fence, and to know what I don't know too. I look at the racial issues in our country, and it's like, I'm not going to pretend. I mean, a lot of people right in the beginning say, well, you must understand to some degree. I'm like, no, I won't even begin to say I understand what it feels like to be a black man today. Not even begin going to, that would be so rude. Because that's ancestral, that's generational. It's been going on for generations. In so many ways, what I'm dealing with is new, right? What they're dealing with is systemic, but it gives me an inkling, right? And it positions me in a way that I want to do the work of understanding, that we all should. But it is, for me, it's just, I changed political affiliations from when I was married to what got underneath it, and I realized what was really at the root of decision making. What's really at the root of why people choose to vote the way they do? What values are they basing that on? What are they looking for? And that was a long time ago, but nonetheless, it was rooted in the difference. To me, to really break it down, is, do we think of ourselves or do we think of others? And I personally, to me, it's, again, we were talking before about paradox and the delicate balance. I mean, it's both. It's not an either or. We don't just think of ourselves or just others. It's thinking of both others and ourselves. But I never leave the other part out. And I personally never vote in ways that are going to favor me at the sacrifice of other people. And so my own life experience has shifted and opened up a lot of perspectives, and learning to get comfortable in the gray.
Well, Jeffrey, I don't know what your expectations were for this interview, but I appreciate you allowing me to go to perhaps some places you haven't gone before on one of these. So thank you so much for not only your book, but for taking the time to share your experiences in your life and that perspective with me today. So how can people connect with you and follow along and get a copy of the book and all that good stuff?
So my general website is jeffreyshaw.com. But if you're more specifically interested in the work of being self-employed, be it the book as well as other things, then the place to go is theselfemployedlife.me, because there is where I've kind of brought together the whole world of work around self-employed, the book, the summit I just recently hosted, articles I write. Because one of the core issues of being self-employed is that we don't have everything we need in one place. It's spread out all over the place. So it's a constant effort for me in the book as well as on that page of my website, theselfemployedlife.me, to bring everything in one place so that you're not hunting all over the place for what you need.
Fantastic. I'll be sure that is linked in the show notes. Jeffrey, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure connecting with you, sir.
Likewise. Thank you. And thank you for creating the show that you have. It's really meaningful. It's going to do some beautiful things.
I appreciate that. So many thanks to Jeffrey for sharing his story on the show today. Please do me and Jeffrey a huge favor. Share this episode with someone you know who might also find some value in listening to our conversation today. Share the episode with your network. Spread the good word about the importance of asking more questions. And if you like the conversations with the amazing guests like Jeffrey that I have on each week, be sure to subscribe to the follow-up question so that you never miss an episode. If you ever want to get in touch with me, you can always email me. It's michael@thefollowupquestion.com, or you can go to thefollowupquestion.com and reach out there. You can also sign up for my weekly newsletter, which drops every Friday, where I expand on a key idea or theme from that week's conversation. This week, of course, will be based on the conversation you just heard with Jeffrey and his book, The Self-Employed Life. I'll catch you on the next episode of The Follow-Up Question, and until then, keep asking questions.